my spirit is really accusing me, or my soul, or some part of me feels like a lack of value, I can always point to the cross and say, for whatever it's worth, I was worthy, or I was somehow worth the blood of the firstborn son of the Father. God came and died for me. Like, you're not going to find more status than that, right? 'Cause one of the things you can always experience is, when you're trying to figure out what something's worth, an old adage is, well, what is somebody willing to pay for it? Like, that's how you find the value for something.
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jeremy Pryor podcast. I am joined today by my two lovely daughters, Sydney Pryor and Kyra. Kyra Faith, this is your first podcast, yeah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is awesome. So Kyra's 15 now. Kyra, you don't have to feel any pressure to say anything on my podcast. This is a place where I get to share some things. And if you have questions or comments, feel free to make them. We're trying to really, I would say, model free speech. So people are terrified today to say what they think. Oh my gosh, I might say something that I regret. Who cares? So part of what we want to do is just say, look, we live in a free country. And so one of the things we want to enjoy is just, hey, this is our take. And sometimes we're wrong. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to say what you think. And we're here to have a discussion. And so we can challenge each other. If you disagree with something I say, you can bring that up. But I do like to bring up, some complex, sometimes abstract topics. So today I got two topics for you guys, and they're both things that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and just want to get kind of share them with you guys. And then just also anything that this stirs up, any topics, any examples, any questions, feel free to interact on those things. So
Cool.
So the first topic is status. So I don't know if you guys know this. We are status seeking creatures. We have some innate ability to walk into a room and immediately know where we're at in the pecking order, like and it's inside of us, and it deeply impacts our motivations, how we feel, if we're going up or down in status. And so this is just an under discussed topic. And I was listening to an interview a couple months ago where a guy was really trying to diagnose all the things that are happening with woke through the lens of status. And I hadn't heard anybody do this in this way before. So I want to introduce his thoughts to you guys in a couple quick clips and like unpack this idea that what if what is happening with the whole woke thing, particularly with Gen Z, is that they have found the status game they want to play. Is that what's happening? So I think it's a fascinating hypothesis, and I'd like to consider that with you guys. So let me play a couple clips from this, and we'll see what you guys think.
Of people are trying to be successful, but some can't, right? Not everybody can be the most successful person in the tribe.
Yeah.
And do they then often lean towards one of either being a bit of a bully, dominance, or virtue, which is showing everyone how wonderful and nice they are?
Well, I think one of the important things to know about status is that it isn't about being the best. It's just about being respected by other people. So it's not that we have to be the best chef in the world or even the best chef in the restaurant, but you have to be. It's just that feeling of like, I'm pretty good at this. Yeah. That's all it is, and it's important that other people reflect that back at us too. Like, other people kind of give us the gift of prestige, that kind of form of status. So it's not that we all have to be the best or even want to be the best. Actually, when you ask most people don't want to be at the very top, because at the very top comes all this pressure and responsibility, and it's really the kind of alpha A players that pursue that kind of peak performance. Most people aren't that insane.
Yeah.
But there is some truth in what you say, and I think a lot of that you can see culturally over the last maybe 20 years. My kind of theory about one of the things that's responsible for the rise of woke culture is that, I'm a Gen Xer, so I was raised in the 80s, 90s, and early noughties, which were this kind of peak, the peak era of the success game kind of culture.
So just to kind of as we're following him along, he's about to make an argument for why this generation is uniquely obsessed with how to gain status through signaling moral virtue. But one of his points is sometimes when you think about a status game, your thought is, oh, we're all desperately trying to become number one. He's like, no, that's actually not how it works. You're trying to get into a category where you feel respected. That's kind of his first point. Now he's saying that generations have different ways of feeling respected. In other words, there's certain games that each generation really liked to play. So he was a Gen Xer, like I was, and he's about to unpack the status game that was popular in our generation,
where success was what was valued, like most of all, especially beginning in the 80s. And so success games were kind of really defined Western culture in a major way. And I think that certainly the perception and definitely a lot of the reality is that for millennials and Gen Z people, those success games have become much harder because the economic, especially since the financial crisis, the economic sphere has become much tougher. So there's the perception, and the perception is what matters, not the reality. People think that the game is fixed. People think that there's no point pursuing success because I'm not going to get this. I've got this huge student debt. I'm not going to get on the property ladder. It's all fixed by these straight white men who are just ruling the world unfairly. And so,
okay, so he's saying, look, in my generation, in the 80s and 90s, we had a status game that was sort of success, and success is what is really is. He says it's all about perception. So if people perceived you as successful, and this is usually economically, then you could feel good and you would be respected by the culture. But with millennials, and especially now with Gen Z, they don't like that game because they don't think they can win. And so they have to play a different status game. They still want to feel respected, but if they can't feel respected by achieving a certain amount of material success, the way that, maybe the boomers or the Gen Xers would think about status, then they're going to try to come up with another game that's going to give them the feeling of status, right? The feeling like I'm a respected person, I'm an important person, but it's not going to necessarily work to do it the way that these other generations did, because there's real economic hardships that this generation is incurring that is making that game harder to play. And so they're like, I want to opt out of that game. I want to find a game I can actually win.
So what do you do if you can't source your status in the world of success? You move to virtue, because that's another reliable way of earning status. And I think that's part of the reason why we've seen particularly young people move into, because there is such a generational divide. It's primarily Gen Z and millennial people, as far as I can see, who've moved into this kind of very kind of angry, aggressive, virtue-based status play that is wokeism.
I suppose, because what else can you do at that age? Because I remember being a student and I would go on like dates with girls.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back now, like, what the hell did I talk about when I was 18 on a date? Like, what did I say? Like, apart from my mum does this and that, or like my teacher at school is such a difficult, how do you, and then you see, I guess we were all putting like the same posters up to show how individual we were and in dorms, everybody had that one of Train Spotting. Choose this, choose that, Goodfellas and Pulp Fiction. And it's like, look how individual I am. This is who I am. I'm this different, maybe successful, interesting person. And I suppose at that age, it is a difficult time to express any kind of success because you haven't had it yet.
Yeah,
it's a good point, that it's really difficult actually to feel respectable when you're 18, 19, 20. What do you have to suggest that you actually are someone worthy of status or respect? So he's saying, what happens, every generation kind of comes up with a little bit of absurd games, and they kind of roll their eyes when they think about what they were like and what they would signal back then to their friends or to potential people they wanted to date or be attractive to. And this really demonstrates the game that they really want to play.
But by being virtuous, you're able to join a cause and fight. Is that it?
So we're always playing status games, and they're kind of groupish. So that's right, that we all seek to join these groups because the group defines what is high status behavior, what kind of behavior and beliefs are going to earn you status, and what kind of beliefs and behavior are going to remove status from you. And so that's why it's a game. There are these rules, and depending on how well we play by the rules, we kind of rise or fall in status. And that's true of all human groups, whether it's religion, a cult, business, whatever it is. That
So everybody's got these games. Now I want to skip forward to one other part of their conversation about how this works, and then I'll get your guys' take on this.
These things where I think I wrote about it in the Status Game, where if you ask Japanese people if they're offended when white people wear a kimono, they go, no. Like 2% of Japanese people care, give a shit. If a white person wears a kimono, they don't care.
Yeah.
But all these wokey people get very offended if a white person wears a kimono. But the Japanese people themselves don't care. It's like the Latinx thing, you know, like lots of Americans call Latinos or Latinas Latinx, but the actual people from Latin America hate, you know, in general, hate the phrase Latinx, but they get called it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's this intense hypocrisy that they're, and I think that's part of the place where it reveals it as itself as a status game. They don't actually care about what the Japanese people feel or what the people in Latin America feel. It's all about, these are my criteria for claiming status. These are the rules by which high status people and acceptable people have to live by. And if you don't live by them, I'm going to fuck you up and make sure that you, you know, adhere to what I'm saying. And that's why in the book, it's like,
man. Okay. So these two examples, I think, are devastating to any argument against his case. I mean, I think he just proved his case conclusively, as far as I'm concerned. He's saying, look, when you look at people that are, either this is real, right? Either they're really concerned about like, oh, this cultural appropriation, that it's just, you know, it's so horrible what people are doing to Japanese people, or think about how horrible we're treating people from, you know, from Latin cultures by calling them Latinas or Latinos. So that's one possibility. That's a theory that people really are extremely concerned, you know, and caring towards these other cultures, right? That's theory one. Theory two is it has nothing to do with Japanese people, nothing to do with compassion, and nothing to do with, you know, Latinos. What it has to do with is you're just signaling to your friends that you're a high status person. Now, the way you can tell which of these is true is you have to look at the results. Like, are Japanese people offended when a white person wears a kimono? And so we've actually done the research, and less than 2% even care. Do people that are Latinos or Latinas, do they actually care if somebody calls them Latinos or Latinas? Would they prefer to be called Latinx? And if you don't use that, then you're really being insensitive to those people. Well, they've done the research, and nobody cares if you call. In fact, they hate the term Latinx. It's really offensive to that. There is something offensive. It's that, because it doesn't, you know, they have a hyper gendered language, and so it's absurd at some level that you would use that kind of language. But it's critical for somebody to use those kinds of that kind of language in order to signal their superior status to their own peer group that they're trying to gain respect from. That's his point, right? And he's really, I think, conclusively proving this. So he's written a book called The Status Game, and where he really plays this out.
Like, it's a virtue game, but it's also a dominance game, and it's the, you know, a lot of these games kind of blend. And I think the most toxic games of all are virtue dominance games. Which is to say, these people are harvesting status, manufacturing status by being virtuous, but they're using the tactics of dominance. And in that way, they're operating in the same way as a cult, or as in a harmful ideology like Nazism or communism, where people are being forced into adhering to their particular local sets of kind of sacred beliefs.
So yeah, we'll stop there. Just, I'm curious what your guys' take. So then he really ratchets it up at the end there, and he says, this is the absolute worst kind of game, status game, you could ever play. This is, and he uses these examples of the Nazis, the communists. Basically, he's saying, because it's really a cult kind of status game, because you're taking your very unique sensibilities, and you're not just saying, we're going to play this out in this group. You're saying these are universal. Like, nobody should say Latinos or Latinas. Nobody, no white person or non-Japanese person should ever wear a kimono. You're going to immediately judge and enforce, and sometimes even use, like, you know, first of all, shame, but then just increasingly ratchet up in order to enforce this ideology on the culture at large. People that don't agree with you at all, people that don't want to play the game at all, you're going to force them to play the game so that you can. Is it because you're really caring for people? No, it's because the more people play the game, the more you are convinced this is reality instead of what it really is, and that is a status game. Anyway, that's his case. I just wanted to lay out. It's actually kind of a complex idea that I've never really heard articulated this clearly before. And so, yeah, I'm curious. Matt, we'll start with you, Sydney, and then Kyra, if you have any thoughts. what does this stir up for you?
Yeah, I guess I first noticed that this was a dynamic when I talked to my brother growing up and some guy friends and stuff. I realized that they always see things as status. And like when they come into a room and they're immediately like, okay, who's the highest ranking one? Like, where do I fit in? Oh, like a lot of people view the world that way. And it's become harder nowadays to actually base that off of possession or like social status because that's kind of disappeared, and so now we're, like, scrambling. It's like we can't live
Yeah.
without it. We're scrambling for a way for us to determine our status and make sure that we're at the top. So that's kinda crazy that we're taking advantage of serious things like racism and sexism
Right.
and cultural appropriation, and then blowing it out of proportion to where we're kind of making a mockery of it, and then exploiting it to make sure that we're on top in the status. So, that is so demented, that's so insane. Um, I really do think that on some level, these people don't truly care about the culture because then they would see that they're not offended and be like, "Okay, then I'm not offended either."
Right.
I see this all the time, like, if someone that's not Black wears braids or something like that, and then they're always like, "You're stealing from Black culture," and the Black people are like, "No, it's fine. It's a hairstyle. No one cares." There's also a lot of European cultures that wear braids, like, it's not a
Right.
Black thing, and and so I really think that if they actually cared about it, then this would have fizzled out a long time ago. But the fact that it's still going and they've even invented it's like once they exhaust one topic, they move on to another one. Like
Right.
they invent all these different things to try and fix. And it sucks because I do think that like these people are operating like at least at the beginning, they're operating off compassion but then they get carried away by all the people that are kind of the leaders, and they start to believe and get indoctrinated and stuff. Like, I don't think that compassionate people are not caring about these Japanese people and all that stuff. I think it's just they're listening to the leaders and the people that are exploiting this. And so, yeah, it's so demented. It is kind of insane that we're using that now as a way to gain status.
Yeah.
Like, that's where we're at now as a country, as a culture.
Yeah. It's an attempt across an entire generation, and then of course to enforce the game on upstream and downstream generations. Yeah, I'm really trying to work through what the implications of this really is, and I think what you're saying, Sydney, is helpful, and that is that it's important to understand that the people who are inventing this game and who are enforcing this game are not necessarily the same people who are playing the game for good intentions. So there is enough of a veneer of compassion that this actually takes in actually compassionate people. So you have people that are actually like, I really do want to not be offensive, and so I'm learning the rules of this game and trying really really hard to not be offensive and to really be a compassionate, loving person. And so but they don't realize that the rules and the entire framework of what they're now using as the lens through which they're trying to become compassionate is actually a status game, and it's not actually acts of actual compassion. Like that's what's really tricky, I think, about this. It's you can't paint everyone with the same brush and say, oh, they're all somehow consciously playing a status game and they're just duping all of us. No, no, no.
Yeah.
That there are people doing that, but they're a very small number. But they are influential enough, and I think that sometimes it isn't conscious even on their part in terms of what they're playing as a status game. But I think that they're actually not filled with compassion. The people
I
oftentimes who create this.
yeah, I think that it also became really apparent with the Gaza-Israel conflict because one side is very logical and the other side is very, like, emotional.
Right.
So
Minorities are who we're trying to protect.
yeah, and, like, they're seeing the videos of the bombed cities and stuff, and they're immediately reacting and listening to these leaders who should be smarter and should be looking at all the facts and spreading correct information, but instead they're spreading misinformation, and these people are following them like sheep and a
Right.
shepherd. Like, they're following the shepherd. They're just all they know how to do is spew the same things that they are saying.
Right.
I see this all the time with, like, street interviews. Well, they'll say, like, what do you think about Israel and Gaza and stuff? And then they'll start one way, and then the person will give them facts, and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know that," because all they know is what they've been told, and if they're not told the correct information, then they're going to be following this
Right.
these leaders that don't have any compassion and just want
Yes.
status.
I think what's really shocking when you're watching those interviews is that they're oftentimes at protests. And so what you assume, of course, is that if somebody were to show up at a protest and make a sign, from the river to the sea or Queers for Palestine or whatever, that they would actually care about Palestinians and actually understand some of the details about what's happening in the Middle East, but they don't. And so then you have to ask yourself the question, wait a minute, if they're at a protest and they're making signs and they're putting themselves potentially even in danger or a conflict that they have absolutely no understanding of, what are they doing this for? And then, of course, I think this is where this guy's hypothesis is so helpful. They're there getting status. They are there harvesting status from their peers. All the social media, guys, look what I did. Look where I was this weekend. I was doing this incredibly virtuous thing. Isn't that awesome? So that to me, this is why this is such a important piece of the puzzle. Because if you don't understand how central status games are to people's own identity and how difficult I think it is for this generation to figure out what game to play to actually feel like you're a moral or respectable person, somebody worthy of respect, then you're not going to understand the kinds of things that are happening today. Like that's kind of his hypothesis, and it's really, I think it's very compelling in a lot of ways. How about you, Kyra? What does this stir up for you? Any thoughts?
It made me think of the old, or I don't know about old, but the 30-year-old ladies who have wanted kids, but they never did have kids, and then they're like wanting something else to care for and have compassion for. So that makes the crazy lady with the crazy eyes.
Mhm.
And so that they're just like trying to find minorities or like somebody who needs a mother to speak up for them. And when they say things like, "Oh, you can't wear a kimono because that's Japanese," and then the Japanese people are like, "No, it's fine." They're like, "Listen, honey, you don't know. It's not fine." It's like it just doesn't make sense, and their logic is just goes in circles, and yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you see a group in a situation where it's like you can imagine if they didn't have any of these populations, where they're talking about older single women like you're describing, Kyra, or young Gen Zs who are in college, and you're trying to figure out how do they express themselves in a way that makes them a person worthy of respect, that they have self-respect and that they would gain respect from their peers. It is a really interesting question to understand that status is in some ways really, and so you put somebody in a situation where the game that they're playing doesn't seem like they can win or they can get respect. Then what do you do? And this is kind of the edge of my thinking on this. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about this, but I think that if this is a root cause for a lot of really bad ideas and people advocating for something like virtue signaling over actual virtue and the danger that creates, how do we help people actually feel respected? How do we help someone who's in Gen Z, for example, and they look at the economic conditions that they're graduating into, and they don't believe that they're going to be able to achieve very easily economic status and maybe career success. It's going to be a long journey, and there are going to be many years where they're going to feel just undervalued. And so they're looking for a game to play that actually will cause them to be respectable. Do you guys have any thoughts about what somebody like that ought to do in order to avoid being taken in by a virtue status game and just kind of quickly getting status from this kind of moral posturing?
Well, I kind of have a hard time finding a way without Christianity and without Jesus, because when I think about how I have played that game, I've just come to acknowledge my status as a daughter in God's eyes and how that gives me status. And He has given me assignments. He's given me a role to play in the kingdom, in His army. And me playing that role to the best of my ability is what gives me fulfillment and what helps me live my life. And that identity as a daughter gives me status that I don't feel like I have to fight for. I'm not constantly trying to get on top. I'm not constantly trying to prove myself, because I already am that. and then I can love him back by performing my duties, my role in the army, and that gives me joy and fulfillment. And so, but I would say outside of that, it would be difficult. I don't really know why someone would dedicate their lives to being a better person or being a father or mother or creating a legacy. I don't know if there is a whole lot of motivation for that outside of Christianity, but if there is, I feel like that's the route I would go. I think that if you're able to parent well, you're either to father or mother a child well and raise them to be good people, then I feel like that is an accomplishment, and that living your life well like that, imparting wisdom, that will give you status. And like if you've done that well, I just imagine grandfathers, grandfathers and grandmothers. Nothing is more respectable than someone that is old and has lived their life well. They have gone through all these stages of life and not been run down by the world. And so I feel like that's very respectable to me. The gray hair is very respectable, and I think that has kind of lost some of its status. But yeah, again, it's just kind of difficult for me to really carry out that logic without the foundation of Christianity, but because I think that the morals in Christianity are the best morals. The being wise, being loving your neighbor as yourself, even if that means telling them something tough, things like that I just feel like are the best way to live, even as a person. But I don't know why someone would follow that to the T if they weren't a Christian. So it's a little bit difficult.
Have you ever considered starting a family business so you can spend more time working as a family team? We've started a year-long coaching program called Family Inc., where you get weekly coaching with Jeremy, access to our video training for launching family businesses, and lots of ideas for businesses to start that are working for other family teams. Head over to familyteams.com and click Family Inc. to learn more, or to set up a strategy call with Jeremy to see if this might be a good fit for you.
Yeah. Well said. Kyra, what about you? What would you think somebody might need to do in order to overcome being sort of sucked into a status game like this?
I mean, I feel like the reason that people stopped, I mean, they said it in the podcast, but another reason that people might have stopped, especially young people, stopped finding status through work and stuff like that, is because like if you work, you're boring and you want to be unique and cool and fun and whatever. So, a lot of people are, since they want to be unique and cool, they're looking for their truth. And that's like said all over the place. They're looking for their truth. And I mean, as soon as you find truth in Christ, if you do find truth in Christ, then like your status is fulfilled and you don't need, if you feel like you need something else, then there might be something wrong. Like you should feel like this is all you need. You don't need status anymore. So
That's
yeah,
good.
it kind of like fulfills it all the way.
Yeah. This is, it's interesting. The gospel does really make this clear all the way back in Genesis, when Adam and Eve first felt shame when they ate from the fruit and felt they have to do something. I got to find a fig leaf to cover my nakedness. And it's really been for all of human history, every culture, every group is attempting to find a new fig leaf that will successfully cover the shame that they feel at their inadequacy. And so so it's not, I think it's a little dangerous to point to one status game as being superior to another when they're all kind of broken in different ways. There's different dangers, right? There's a particular kind of danger that the success status game will bring into a culture versus a moral status game. But what you guys are saying is, look, in the gospel, you have actually the ability to solve the status problem, which is that, and Paul says this is, he's able to say it on one hand, I'm the worst of all sinners. Like I've got zero status. I mean, I was a persecutor of the church. I was the worst kind of sinner. And yet he says in Galatians at the end, he's like, I boast in the cross of Christ, which really means like when my spirit is really accusing me, or my soul or some part of me feels like a lack of value, I can always point to the cross and say, for whatever it's worth, I was worthy, or I was somehow worth the blood of the firstborn son of the Father. God came and died for me. Like, you're not going to find more status than that, right? 'Cause one of the things you can always experience is, when you're trying to figure out what something's worth, an old adage is, well, what is somebody willing to pay for it? Like, that's how you find the value for something. And so I think what Paul is saying there is, look, somebody was willing to pay, somebody that had more riches and more status than anyone ever had was willing to give all that up to save me. That's what I'm worth. So it's kind of ridiculous for me to entertain accusations against my own status. If I feel those accusations, I just need to boast in the cross and say, look at, this is what someone was willing to pay for me. I don't understand it. I don't deserve it. It's pure grace. Like, I don't feel like that value is somehow inside of me, but that was a decision that God made to love me that much. So yeah, I do agree with what both of you are saying. With outside of a real experience of the gospel, I think we're all stuck trying to go from one status game to another, right? And that's kind of what we need to overcome. I got one more topic I want to share with you guys before I let you go. So this was really interesting to me. So Ben Shapiro was talking to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she's one of the most fascinating people to me. She has been for years. She grew up in Somalia and Saudi Arabia. She underwent female genital mutilation. She was in a family where that was Muslim, but was also being courted by the Muslim Brotherhood, and so she was a part of basically trying to figure out and being pressured to become a radical Muslim. She escaped all of that. She was put into an arranged marriage, and she somehow escaped to the Netherlands. She learned how to speak their language. She actually rose in the parliament, and then she ended up in the United States. She's now at Stanford at the Hoover Institution, and she's married to Niall Ferguson, who's another incredibly brilliant, I think, British man, historian, a cultural critic. And anyway, Ayaan is amazing. What she's overcome is more than almost anyone. But when she was going through these transitions, she basically decided that if Islam's not true, then surely no religion is true. And so she became a radical atheist, and she was a huge proponent of atheism. And I was following her when she was an atheist and a huge proponent for atheism, defending atheism, attacking Christianity and any other religion as really the cause of all the suffering that she was experiencing in the Muslim world, and wanted us to all overcome that. And then she went through a radical conversion to Christianity just several months ago. And so she is now a full-throated believer in Jesus and in the gospel, and she's talking about it in different conversations. She's actually confronting some of she had a conversation publicly a few weeks ago with Richard Dawkins, who's probably the most famous atheist alive today. And they're actually good friends. They became good friends when Ayaan was a very militant atheist. And about an hour-long fascinating conversation. I encourage anybody to watch her defend Christianity from Dawkins' version of atheism. Anyway, but Ben Shapiro wanted to interview Ayaan, and they started talking about what is the real evidence for Christianity or for faith in God. Obviously, Shapiro is a Orthodox Jew. Ayaan is now a brand new believer in Jesus, and Ben Shapiro brings up an argument for the existence of God and for and you can kind of boil it down into Christianity as well, or Judaism, the Judeo-Christian God, but a God as well, just in general, that I think is really important. It's an argument that I don't think gets nearly enough airtime. So I wanted to play their conversation around this argument and get your guys' take on this.
Is sort of your personal story, though, because I do think that it's important for a civilization not only to understand social utility of religion, which of course I agree with and I argue for, but also, I get asked a lot why I believe in God, why I believe in the Torah, for example. And so, the answer that I very typically give is because it works, meaning that if the basic idea is that a series of rules is tested over time and that series of rules proves itself durable, that's now a form of data. And so, sure, there are miracle stories, and that requires a leap of faith, and every system requires a leap of faith, including militant atheism, because there's an is-ought gap between the material world and a set of values. You can't get from one to the other, despite the best attempts of people who I'm friends with, like Sam Harris, to do so. You can't just look at the world and immediately get to, okay, here's why all of these things are immoral. That's an impossible bridge to a gap to bridge, as Hume pointed out. But for me, the argument Thomas Sowell makes is that accepted wisdom of the past is in fact a form of data. And so if a set of rules has worked over time, that's a pretty good indicator. And if it has developed a civilization that you like, that's a good indicator there may be truth to the rules, which suggests there may be truth to the lawgiver. That's the argument that I've used myself in a rationalist way. Obviously there's an emotional component to faith that can't be duplicated, but in a rationalist way, that is sort of my generalized defense of personal religiosity. What is yours when people?
So you guys understand his argument that one of the arguments for the existence of God or for the existence of any religion is if the rules work, and if they repeatedly work in a durable way across generations, then there's evidence that there's something true about the belief. Now, you can get into the nuances about which beliefs and how true, but it certainly is important to investigate that truth. And also the inverse of that, when you begin to present ideas that constantly break societies where things go off the rails, and every time more and more people believe in these things, their life gets worse, and it seems to be violating basic rules about the way the world works, then that's evidence that there's something untrue about those beliefs. So I think it's a really important line of defense for Christianity that we need to really think through. And so I agree with what Shapiro is saying here. And then this is Ayaan's take on
People ask you why you're a person of faith. What's your answer?
Well, I give the same answer as you've just done, just not so eloquently and not at that pace. You do say it very, very well and very, very fast. But also I tell my personal story in the sense that I have sincerely tried to live without faith in a higher power. Do things on my own, answer every question, look it up in a book, see a doctor. And when I started to grapple with questions of, existential questions, deal with my own anxieties, my own depression, and even why I have them at all, or why I had them at all, I didn't turn to a higher power. I turned to things, to materials, to human beings, to alcohol. And my problems just would not go away. And I had gotten myself to a place where actually I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't do anything active to take my life, but the way I was drinking, that was a form of, it was a slow form of suicide, basically. And I had come to that crossroads of either just keep doing what you're doing and die this death that a lot of alcoholics die, or turn away from it, choose to live. And that came with a therapist saying, the problem with you is you are spiritually bankrupt. And I thought it's a very harsh thing to say. It hit a nerve. It resonated with me. Think of it as a slap that turned me in the right direction. And as soon as I surrendered, I had I had tried everything. Anything that a psychiatrist could prescribe, I had taken it all. I had done it all. I had nothing left but to do what I did. And for me, that was, you can think of it as a moment of revelation. I prayed. I begged God to let me live and to take this thing away from me. And with this thing, I don't mean just the drinking. I mean whatever was causing the drink, whatever the pain, the depression, the void. And this was in January of 2023. I haven't touched a drink since. My life has never been better. I feel reconnected, literally reconnected with myself, with my family, I'm alive. I feel things. I have sensations. And for a long time, I didn't have that. And so that's my story. Now, I've spoken to Richard Dawkins, and Richard is not, he respects all of that, but obviously he's not going to become, I don't think he thinks of himself as someone going on his knees and praying to God. But he's a very sensible man. He's a dear friend. I love Richard. I love Sam Harris. These are very, very close friends, very dear friends. They don't have to convert to any religion. But if, I haven't spoken to Sam for a while, but if like Richard, they say, but Christianity is much more sensible. And a better story for humanity, for us, those of us who choose to cherish its legacy, I'll take that.
I just, the humility that I think it took for her to do that with the reputation as an atheist that she had developed. But it is so powerful to understand, like her testimony. And this is why I think it's really important for people who really struggle with faith in God to understand that a testimony like that is evidence. I don't think it's proof, but it's evidence that something is true about what she's believing. Like, to see that transformation. C.S. Lewis had a similar perspective. He says, I believe that the sun has risen, not because I look at the sun, but because by it I see everything else, right? So if suddenly you put on glasses and the world suddenly makes sense, and all the things that were dark are lit up, and there's something true, right? There's something about that lens that's evidence that there's truth there. And I think that we're in real trouble if people continue to just destroy the lenses through which people can actually see the light and say, look, I don't understand what the rational basis for this is, but they don't take as a rational argument the fact that it works, that it transforms people's lives predictably, and that people can go into incredible despair without any real meaning. It's like we were built for meaning, right? We were built for some kind of world in which the truths that are explicitly clear within our faith, we were built for the world in which we can apprehend those things. And without that, you begin to live and experience this meaningless life that she was describing. So I love her testimony. I'm fascinated by what the journey she's on. And I do think like this line of argumentation needs to be more utilized and more highly respected. But yeah, what do you guys think? Anything that's stirring up for you? Sydney, why don't you go ahead?
Are you following us on Facebook and Instagram yet? Look up @FamilyTeams to get even more free content and never miss out on event announcements.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why the Bible emphasizes testimony so much, is like, proclaim it to the rooftops. Like, this is the best evidence for the existence of Jesus and the existence of him being God's son. And I think that's so much more important to talk about than the rules and the whole dynamic of shame versus like your sins being condemning you. Because I think that might have worked for other cultures or other generations, because they care a lot about shame and they care a lot about like having their guilt taken away. But I think nowadays, the more in this culture, the more compelling case is you can either live a meaningless, mentally ill life, or you can be filled with so much identity and love that you don't need any of that. You don't need drinking. You don't need medication. You can just live the fullest life that you could possibly live. Like, don't you want to be free of all these burdens? So I think that is the most compelling argument for the existence of Jesus, is how, like, look at my life before and now look at me. Like, isn't this insane? And I loved hearing all of those stories when I spent time at YWAM, because everyone had them. Like, and I got to really, I felt so close to Jesus because I could see his existence so well in these people. I think that's what Jesus really wants. I think we're supposed to be able to see him when we look at his children.
Yes.
So yeah, it's very special.
Yeah, man. Yeah. The light in their face. And you can really see with Ayaan, like, it's amazing. It's hard to even imagine when she was describing what she was struggling with, that really darkness. And when she described that somebody had the courage to say to her, "You are spiritually bankrupt." Famous, one of the, author, thinker. But I think, what it's suggesting is that there is this nutrient that she was missing, and it was killing her, literally. And another argument from C.S. Lewis that he uses is, look, if you discover that there's something you need to have to live, that's evidence that such a thing exists, right? He says the fact that we hunger doesn't mean we're going to get food, but it does suggest that such a thing as food exists, right? The appetite demands that the fulfillment of the appetite exists, right? If people desire sex, that doesn't prove they're going to have sex, but it does mean that such a thing as sex exists people have these spiritual appetites and they desperately need them to be fulfilled. And if they don't, they might go down a very dark road medicating the bankruptcy that they're feeling. But that does prove that such a thing as spiritual fulfillment exists. And you can see that she is experiencing that kind of fulfillment in her life now, which is, praise God for that. Kyra, yeah. Why don't you round us up? Anything that stirs up for you? What do you think about that?
I was thinking about all those people who are going through what she went through, like not being able to feel anything and just like, spiritual bankruptcy, drinking, taking medication because she's like absolutely depressed. That's just a terrible state of being. And that it, like we've been saying, it proves that we are beings that are made for something other than the only thing that is visible here. Like, the Bible says man shall not live by bread alone. So we need Jesus. We need the Holy Spirit. So yeah, it just makes me think of all those people who are searching for something and like seem to not be able to find it. Like, I think that that Jesus sent us out to find those people when they're trying to look for stuff. And
Yes.
I mean, he sent us to find everybody, but those are the people who are ready and who need it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just makes me think of that.
Said, yeah, man does not live by bread alone. And so when you see someone starving, you need to give them bread. That's what, when I hear therapist or whoever it was who said to her, you're spiritually bankrupt, it was like, let me give you bread. I know you've already rejected, like, I won't eat. I won't, let me give you what's beyond, or beyond bread, right? This thing that you actually are looking for. Yeah. And to your point, Kyra, yeah, it's cruel not to look for people who are starving and give them food if you have it and you can find those people. And I think that, this is why I think actually reaching out to people and talking about faith is so important. And sometimes people culture are like, well, you should never do that. Like, these people are starving. Yeah, I don't want to inadvertently or overwhelm somebody who's not interested and who's, not starving or claiming not to need that. And this is why I think she's being kind of generous and to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris when she says, look, I'm not trying to tell them to convert. I think her point there is what you're saying, Kyra, like they're not exerting or exhibiting overtly, at least, any signs that they're interested in this kind of spiritual food. So, but there are millions of people that are, and so we want to be helping those people and making sure that we are as well making clear that there is a reason to believe that is related to the fact that people are starving and they need this kind of sustenance. So awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thanks again, Sid and Kyra. Welcome to the podcast for the first time. You're an amazing guest. I love getting to talk to you in this format. It's a lot of fun. So awesome. Well, I will see you guys in a few hours, if not before then.
Cool. All right.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.